The term bittersweet gets thrown around a lot, and we may have a sense of what it means, or perhaps we've felt it, but what does it sound like? Well, to answer that question, we're going to analyze the soundtrack of Hollow Knight. I've said it on this channel before, what makes a game soundtrack good is how much it supports the gameplay and world that it accompanies. Skyrim has one of the best soundtracks of all time, but it works best in the context of Skyrim. You can't just slap it on any other top-rated game and get the same success. This is a key reason why the Hollow Knight soundtrack hits so hard. It really encapsulates the feeling of the world you're exploring. So what is the world you're exploring? Well, to answer that, this video will have to get into some light spoilers for the game, so if you're still enjoying it or yet to enjoy it, you may want to come back to this later. However, I personally don't think knowing the story ahead of time diminishes the experience of playing Hollow Knight all that much. Hollow Knight is a Metroidvania, so named because it follows in the footsteps of trend-setting games like Metroid and Castlevania. What it means is that you're given a couple moves and a map and just sent out to explore and fight enemies. As you go, you'll reach obstacles that won't become passable until you find a new weapon or ability, and the story is told experientially through exploration. When we start out in Hollow Knight, we pass through what could be described as the tutorial zone and enter Dirtmouth, called the Fading Town. It is small and mostly abandoned, and the Elder Bug will tell you that all the residents went down the well to seek riches below the town in some old ruined kingdom. As you explore and find these residents, they will one by one return to town, much to the Elder Bug's delight. Right off the bat, we get a sense that we've stepped into a world past its prime and hanging on by a thread. And what do we hear as we wander around this ghost town? This track is a bit haunting, with simultaneous moments of sweetness and discomfort, so let's look at how it achieves that. Overall, we're in E minor, as we can see from the bass line and the first two measures outlining this one chord. Let's stay with the bass line for a moment. The second phrase starts to descend through D major to C major, ignoring these neighbor tones. This is a pretty familiar progression, stepwise in minor from 1 down through major 7 and 6, then at the end it steps back up to D to return to E minor. That's what gives us the sweetness. Even though it's in minor, we have a sense of familiarity, as well as comfort because of that stepwise descent, ultimately guiding us towards C major. However, the melody is what adds the discomfort. It emphasizes F sharp, which is not a tone in the tonic E minor chord. In fact, the entire first phrase is at odds with the bass line. As the bass outlines E minor, the melody outlines something totally different, even ending on a non-diatonic C sharp. If the whole thing was an F sharp minor, you'd have something that just sounded a bit sad. But because the melody is essentially a step away from the key, it keeps us from feeling totally settled in one place or emotion. At the end of the second phrase, it seems like they're going to get along after all, both settling on C major, but then the violin enters and reintroduces that sense of not quite fitting. Things start to sweeten up in the second phrase of the violin, with the melody and bass ascending together in thirds, always a winning sound, but then there's a sudden shift to F major in the bass, with a B on top. F major in E minor is called the Neapolitan, a major chord built on the lowered second scale degree. Over this, the melody is landing on a B, which is a tritone away from F. This is about as unstable and uncomfortable as it can get, but then the bass continues on to G under the sustained B, bringing security back into our ear. This repeats with some added ornamentation in the piano part, and a slight counter melody from the violin. but this time instead of descending E, D, C, the bass descends C, B, A, dipping to lower neighbor G on the way. The C sharp returns in B minor as a diatonic neighbor borrowed from that key, but when it happens again over A, it hints at A major, a decidedly nice sound, if not for the suspension in the piano part. The violin fades out as the piano goes on a new harmonic journey. It starts at home in E minor, then descends a third to C, another third to A, stepwise to G, through F, and back to E. This sinking bass line serves to counter the various ascending moments we've had so far, each representing a bit of hope perhaps, but lost as the bass takes us lower and lower. The second time this descent starts, it brings back our C sharp over A major, then counters it with another F major Neapolitan. The journey reaches its apogee at B flat major, a tritone away from E minor and almost as far outside the key as you can get. It is able to return again through stepwise motion, pausing on C major, and of course the relation of C major to E minor is at this point familiar enough to pivot us back to the beginning. Back to these ascending patterns. I mentioned that the residents of Dirtmouth all left, but the Elderbug is hoping that their return will revitalize the town. The melody overall is characterized by this rising motion. It never seems to be able to get any momentum, however, always landing back where it started. Only at the end do we get a sense of real hope as both the melody and bassline climb out of the depths, but ultimately even that is fleeting, just like the Elderbug's hope for a revival of Dirtmouth. It is likely that players will find their way to the Greenpath relatively early after descending below Dirtmouth. Greenpath is immediately a stark contrast to the dull and colorless gloom of Dirtmouth and the Crossroads. It is lush, green, and vibrant with life, and the music reflects this. This track is in a more whimsical compound meter, as opposed to Dirtmouth's slow 4, though this is somewhat obscured by the harp at the beginning. When the bass arpeggios start, we get a better sense of the meter, as well as the shape of an 8-bar phrase. We're in E minor here as well, but unlike Dirtmouth, which really sustained the E minor sonority, these harmonies move around a lot. We start with E minor, then move to B, the dominant. From here we have a short harmonic sequence, up a step, down a third, through C, A, B, G, A, then instead of down a third, we move up a third back to C, then another third to return to E for the start of the next phrase. Notice though that these arpeggios don't outline a triad, so to speak. Each chord has a root, a fifth, and a second. Typically the second is considered a dissonance, but when you displace it by the octave and repeat it on every chord, it loses that dissonant identity. Dissonance prolonged long enough becomes consonance, so our ear adapts to what would be called a non-chord tone and begins to accept it as part of the chord. This is key to the tracks in Hollow Knight. Remember back in Dirtmouth how the melody awkwardly started a step above the tonic pitch E? Well, it doesn't seem so awkward now since that particular dissonance is getting repeated over and over until it starts to sound natural. The viola enters with a melody, and in case you're not accustomed to reading alto clef, here it is transposed into treble clef. Notice anything interesting? It's the same melody as Dirtmouth, though the meter is changed. While Dirtmouth used a triplet ascending pattern to offset it from the duple rhythm underneath, Greenpath uses a duple ascending pattern to offset it from the triple rhythm underneath. Same idea, but swapped, with the meter suiting each area differently. So if it's the same melody as Dirtmouth, why does it sound so much more peaceful here, while it definitely felt melancholic in Dirtmouth? Or to put it another way, it sounds bitter in Dirtmouth and sweet in Greenpath? Well, to answer that, we may need to get into the story and identify the differences between the two areas. Both Dirtmouth and Greenpath are part of the fallen kingdom of Hallownest. A long time ago, the Pale King arrived into this desolate area and began to build a kingdom. Prior to his arrival, the bugs of the land worshipped the Radiance, a creature that would completely subdue the will of her followers, drawing them into a kind of hive mind. The Pale King came and began to give sentience and free will to the bugs, and they turned away from the Radiance to follow him. He built the kingdom of Hallownest, uniting all the areas between the cliffs under his rule. The Radiance resented this, and attempted to reach out to her former followers through the only power she had left, in dreams. Her attempt to reconnect resulted in the fracturing of the bugs' minds, and her influence spread as an infection. Bugs suffering from the infection became husks of their former selves, wandering either purposeless or stuck in whatever routines they had before the infection. The Pale King tried desperately to seal away the Radiance and end the infection, but ultimately it spread throughout Hallownest, reducing almost all its citizens to mindless wandering husks. The version of Dirtmouth we see is the one in which the residents have either succumbed to the infection or left, seeking livelihood elsewhere. It has faded and decayed, and the Elder Bug does not have much expectation for its revival. Greenpath, on the other hand, was under the protection of the greater being Un. Un created the area and its residents, the Mosskin, from her dream, and while the Mosskin were not unaffected by the infection, the land itself retained its lush and vibrant life. So while we hear the same melody as we do in Dirtmouth, it portrays a very different character, one in which hope has not altogether vanished. The harp provides a sparkling heartbeat for the vegetation, and the active harmonic movement demonstrates that things in Greenpath have not become as stale and stagnant as they have above ground in Dirtmouth. Thanks for watching part 1 of this video about what makes the music in Hollow Knight sound so bittersweet. I hope you'll subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dive even deeper into the kingdom and the lore, and analyze some truly amazing music. See you next time.